The war on drugs in the United States started well before the 1960s. After the Civil War was over, there was an attempt to reinstitute slavery in many of the southern states. African Americans were expected to enter some form of involuntary servitude, and although were full American citizens, they were denied rights like voting, which their white counterparts had. Decades after Reconstruction came World War II. African Americans were in segregated troops, were not allowed to be integrated, but could still fight. After World War II, the suburban boom began, with whites moving into nicer, developing subdivisions, but African Americans were left out of the suburban movement. The Federal Housing Administration made sure that African Americans could not buy property in the same areas as their white counterparts. The federal government passed laws saying if there were a certain amount of African Americans, the neighborhood would be redlined, property values would drop, there would be a great security risk to the white people if they were to buy in those neighborhoods, and investors were not allowed to invest there. The redlined areas became run down and turned into what we now know as ghettos. After dehumanizing African Americans and keeping them out of suburban booms, they wanted to criminalize a drug to turn the African American and minority population into criminals. They started with marijuana. The marijuana criminalization started with Hispanics. The Hispanics had used a drug called marijuana, and the whites sought to make the Hispanic Americans into criminals, so they created the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which banned the selling and production of marijuana. They soon moved on to African Americans. A quote from a former President Nixon aide said, "You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies and blacks with marijuana and heroin and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities."
America's public enemy number one in the United States is drug abuse.
According to the ACLU, the nationwide white drug arrest rate is 192 per 100,000 whites, and the black drug arrest rate was 716 per 100,000 blacks. Cocaine was considered the champagne of drugs in the early 1900s. Whites loved to use this powdery substance, which was too expensive for any other ethnic group to purchase. To cope with that issue, African Americans made their own cheaper version of cocaine and called it crack cocaine. The federal government soon caught on to this new drug and quickly penalized it. A 1986 bill was signed to criminalize crack cocaine, even though they are virtually the same drug. The only difference between cocaine and crack cocaine is that crack lacks the same salt cocaine yields, yet the punishment for being caught with crack versus cocaine according to the ACLU is 100 to 1. The two pie charts shown above demonstrate the disparities there are in the crack cocaine arrests. The chart on the right shows how many crack cocaine users are white, and although you can't see the African American, Hispanic, and others distinguished, you can infer that they are collectively using it at a much lesser rate than whites are. On the left pie chart, you can see African Americans make up more than 75% of the crack cocaine arrests, while whites only make up a fraction. Another less commonly talked about side effect of incarceration is that families traveling to jails are often subject to intrusive search procedures, which may be conducted in the presence of other individuals unknown to the family and by male staff members who are characterized by family members as humiliating. Time and time again, the United States has struggled to grasp the concept that there are, in fact, racially charged drug incarceration rates in this country. African Americans have been at the center of the unofficial war on drugs since slavery ended and have continued to be persecuted, prosecuted, and imprisoned by our justice system. A study done by the American Civil Liberties Union in 2000 said, "There can no longer be any doubt that America's justice system is not blind. Lady Justice sees color all too well." The report documents that Black and Brown Americans are routinely shunted to even harsher treatment at every stage in the criminal justice system, while their white counterparts are handed preferentially. The United States must reform and repair the way African Americans are handled in the criminal justice system. For too long, African Americans have been unfairly treated when it comes to drug arrests. Our founding fathers intended the justice system to be blind, yet she sees. Lady Justice sees skin color. She sees socioeconomic statuses. She sees where you live. She judges family and friends, and she has no mercy.